From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. A quick warning, some of the material in this next segment may not be suitable for all listeners. A new law will make death by firing squad the primary way Idaho executes prisoners on death row. Now, Idaho has 8 people on death row currently, and our state was supposed to perform an execution in December. However, officials could not get the chemicals required for lethal injection. So lawmakers in the Idaho legislature decided death by firing squad would be the better option. Now, whenever someone is executed, a few journalists act as witnesses and report on what happened. It is an incredibly difficult job, and those who do it are profoundly changed by what they see. Dr. Jeff Spurlock is a professor at Boise State University and the Associate Chair of Integrated Media. 25 years ago, he worked at Sam Houston State University, and he was a witness to the execution of Michael Lee McBride. He recently wrote an article about what he saw and how it changed him, and he's here with us today. I want to welcome you to the program, Dr. Spurlock.
Thank you, Gemma. Thanks for having me.
So can you take us back to 25 years ago? And let's start with this. Who was Michael Lee McBride, and what did he do?
Certainly. Michael Lee McBride was a 26-year-old man who was dating an 18-year-old Texas Tech student. And it was kind of an on and off rocky relationship that they had for about a year. And at this point, it was off, the relationship. But they got in touch with each other, the two, and the girl's name was Christiane Fisher. She was 18 at the time. And Christiane had called Michael because he owed her some money. And so he said, please come to my house. I'll have a piece of artwork. I don't have the money, but I'll have a piece of artwork that would basically satisfy the monetary debt that I owe you. And so she came. She was somewhat reluctant because, again, it was the relationship was rocky at this time. So she brought a friend with her by the name of James Holzer. James was also an 18-year-old Texas Tech student. So the two of them went to Michael Lee McBride's house. He came out with a shotgun. And so this really surprised both of them. And they had a few words, he and Christiane, and it ended up that he shot her and killed her. At the same time, James is in the car. He comes around to his side of the car and shoots and kills him. So he's killed 2 people in just a matter of a few seconds. And then Michael decides to take his own life. He attempted suicide, but it did not work. And so he was wounded. Police came and he was arrested and subsequently put in prison and was a few years later, he was tried and convicted and sentenced to death. A few years later, he was executed on May 11th of 2000, which is coming up in just a few weeks. Mm-hmm. Michael Lee McBride was executed. I was working at the time as a professor at Sam Houston State University. I was working on some research on the media and the death penalty, and had gotten in touch with someone from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and Corrections, asking that I knew that there were just usually every time that an execution was carried out in Texas, that there had to be at least one media representative who witnessed the execution. So I was put on the waiting list, and I got a phone call just 2 or 3 days prior to McBride's execution asking if I wanted to witness it. I did, and so it was certainly an eye-opening experience for me. A few days later, I went to the execution. I really didn't know what to expect, except I knew that there was going to be an execution carried out. I knew that someone was going to die that day, and it was an eye-opening experience.
Take us through the execution. Tell us about that, because you were there.
I was.
My understanding is that he spoke to all of you who were watching before his execution began. What did McBride say?
He did not actually speak to us in particular. His father was there. his female companion, who he had met while he was in prison, was present. And then there were 3 media representatives, and I was one of those, 3 or 4 media representatives, and I was one of those. He looked into the microphone, which was placed in front of his face. He strapped down in a gurney, and the microphone was placed in front of his face. He did not acknowledge any of us. He just said, I apologize for what I did, and I apologize to all the parties involved. He said, I wish I could recite 1 Corinthians 13, which is a love passage in the New Testament, but he said, but I can't. And he said, I'm sorry, thank you. And then they started the lethal injection. Now, this was by lethal injection, not firing squad, so it was done by lethal injection. And when they started administering the drugs inside his veins, there were a couple of things that Mr. McBride did say. In fact, he said at 6:11 p.m., this is when the lethal dose started going into his arms, he said, pretty cool. I feel it in the back of my throat. And these were his last words. And then 6:12, there was a gurgling cough that came from his mouth. There was nothing more. And just a few moments later, we did not hear anything except to hear that the doctor's confirmation that McBride was no longer living. So in just a matter of a minute or two, he was pronounced dead. So this is probably the most. I was a reporter before I went into teaching, and was a reporter for 15 years. And this by far was the most memorable story I ever covered. I don't think I'll ever witness an execution again, but it was something that I did want to witness. I did want to see it because I was researching this, and I wanted to see firsthand on what it's like. Now, I'll tell you, you've probably heard other accounts of executions that have gone on in the United States, and some people will resist all the way up to the time that they're pronounced dead. Not the case with Michael Lee McBride. He was very calm, very collected. He spoke very eloquently. You know, the few words that he did say, he spoke very eloquently. And I'm just looking at him the entire time. He's a small man. He was a small man, 5 feet 4 inches tall. And I just looked at him, and in the article that I wrote, I found somewhat guilt in I should say, the way that he looked, he would find guilt in swatting a fly, let alone gun down 2 people. So he looked like a very nice guy. He was very eloquent, and just to imagine or just to reflect that he had gunned down 2 people and he was about to die, that was certainly an eye-opening experience for me.
I can tell in your voice that it has profoundly impacted you. And you know what I find
Certainly.
interesting about you witnessing this? I, as a journalist, have never witnessed an execution. However, I was on the anchor desk in December of 1997 in Lincoln, Nebraska, when there was an execution at the Nebraska State Prison. And we had a reporter who witnessed it. And as this was going on, I'm live on air as these news stations are.
Right.
And I'm having to, set it up for our reporter who's out in the field to talk about this. So I have a producer, in my ear telling me like how many minutes, until the execution. Then it has happened. Now he has died. And because of that experience and how it has sat with me for almost 30 years, I've always said to him, I will never witness that because it impacts you, I think, in ways you don't expect. And I'm curious about what has sat with you with that, because what sat with me was I shouldn't know when someone's going to die. And take out what they do, right? Because I think that's part of it is sometimes we forget the humanity in it. So I'm just curious about how this has impacted you for the last 20 years.
Well, I'll tell you this, Gemma, and that is when this happened around 6:00 p.m. on that evening, May 11th of 2000. I was scheduled to be at the prison about 90 minutes before the actual execution took place. So we had to have a certain dress code. I had to wear a suit. We had to have closed shoes. And so I walked in, and there were the 3 or 4 other media representatives. Now, the 2 people, the McBride's father and his female companion, were in another room. And if I can kind of describe what the setting looked like, was you've probably seen in movies or television shows where they show executions, and you have a room with about 10 or 12 chairs, people sitting down in one room, and then you have another room kind of in a glassed-in chamber or glassed-in border with the same amount of people. Not so here in Texas, and that was there were no chairs, and so the media reps were behind a glass wall where we could see inside the death chamber, and on the other end, the other side, were the two other people, his father and his female companion. They were in the other room. We could see them, but we couldn't talk to them. Mm-hmm. I could talk with the other media representatives, but we had to stand, and I basically had to kind of look around to position myself to get a good glimpse of Michael Lee McBride inside the glassed-in chamber. I will tell you, the other 3 or 4 media representatives who were in there had witnessed at least 100 executions each, because Texas is the execution capital, the execution state in the United States. And just in fact, since in the last 43 years, there have been somewhat 600 executions that have occurred just in Texas alone. So it is the execution capital of probably the United States, maybe the world too. But anyway, as far as the states are concerned, it's the top. So these guys had witnessed a number of executions in their life. It was just another story to them. It's just another fact to them that they would write in the newspaper the next day. To me, it was something different because I had never witnessed anything like this before, and certainly I probably will never see it again. But just knowing that morning I was going to go into the Walls Unit, that's what it's called, the Walls Unit, the prison there in Huntsville, Texas. I knew I was going to go there. I knew I was going to go there 90 minutes before a guy was going to die, and I was going to watch him die. I knew that. And it's the same thing with McBride. He knew that at 6:11 or around that time, that evening, he was going to die. He woke up that morning knowing that, in about 12 hours, I'm no longer going to live. And that's kind of what I was going through too. It didn't go, I just knew that I was going to witness someone dying in about 12 hours when I woke up that morning. So for the last 20 years, I think about it all the time because I'm a professor at Boise State now, and people will ask me, what is the most memorable story that you ever covered? And that's it. The execution of Michael Lee McBride. I never met the guy. I never said one word to him. He wasn't a friend, but I saw him die. And so this was, something I'll always remember.
I want to talk a little bit about the article that you wrote, because you say in the article, you, quote, vividly recall each moment of the event, and it put shivers down your spine. But also, you mentioned your own father in this article. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, certainly, Gemma. My dad died in 1993. He was now not of execution, certainly, but he died of heart failure in 1993. And he was an elementary school principal for most of his life. All of his adult life he was. He had retired a few years earlier than 1993. And I always remember him because the way that he passed away was he and my mom every day. I'm from, give me a little background. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. You could probably hear from my my accent. It still comes out every once in a while. But anyway.
It's there just a little bit.
Yeah. But, and so my mom and dad still lived in Nashville. And every day they would get up and they would go to a local mall and walk because the mall would open up the doors to the mall, and lots of senior citizens would just walk around the mall to get their exercise. And so this was just a daily routine that my mom and dad did every day. And one day, my mom always walked 2 miles. My dad walked a mile, and so it was one day. This was in '93, and my mom walked her first mile. My dad finished his mile. And he said, okay, I'm just going to go to the car. And I'm finished. I'm going to go to the car. She said, I'll meet you after I complete my second mile. So she finished her second mile. She came to the car, and his head was slumped over the steering wheel. And she said, okay, let's go home. And he didn't respond. He had died of a massive heart attack right after he walked. That certainly, I think about that every day too. You know, his death was not expected. McBride's was, and I guess that's the way that I want to go. Is the way that my dad did. Is that he was not in pain. He was a great guy. Now he was overweight. I'll tell you that he was overweight, but he didn't have any health problems, and he just passed away. And that's probably the way that I want to go. But I mentioned my dad in the article is that he really couldn't do anything wrong in the eyes of my mom and my siblings and I. He loved the show The Price is Right, and so he and my mom once went out to California, and he got on The Price is Right. And in fact, he won a set of luggage. He met Bob Barker. And it was great. It was great. In fact, they aired that episode aired just a few days before he passed away.
Oh my goodness!
The recording, they taped the show 3 or 4 months in advance, but he actually got to see himself on the air when it aired just a few days before he died. So I think of Dad every day, and I think of Michael Lee McBride every day too, because that's the story that stands out most in my mind as far as what I've covered over the years.
And I know that you've been thinking quite a bit about all of this in connection with our state's new law that will make the firing squad the primary source of execution. This will begin July 1st. This is when this new law goes into effect. I'm curious if you've been watching the debate over using the firing squad and your thoughts, having witnessed an execution that was by lethal injection and by your own witness account was rather swift and
yes, it was
rather painless.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I will tell you this, there have been many methods of execution over the years. We've had public hangings. We've had the electric chair. We've had the gas chamber. We've had firing squads. We've had lethal injection. But if you look at it just over the years, there were times that there were botched executions of people who were hanged. There were botched executions of people who were put to death by the electric chair. The same thing with the gas chamber. There have been botched executions or execution attempts by lethal injection, as we certainly know by Thomas Creech, the guy in Idaho who's still on death row. And so there have been botched attempts on all of these methods. The firing squad The firing squad is, it, in my opinion, it's kind of hard to mess up the firing squad because you probably have 4 to 5, maybe 6 guards who actually shoot deadly bullets into the inmate's body. Unless the guards are really bad marksmen, I have a feeling that this is probably the execution method that's probably going to be botched less than any of the others that have been attempted. So my thoughts on that, I think it's probably the best method to use. That's just my opinion. I can certainly, others are going to argue with me on that, but I think it's probably the most painless, if you will. Well, I mean, bullets are going to go into a person's body, so he's going to pass away right away. It's really hard, in my opinion, to botch that one up. So I don't think you're going to find many executions if the firing squad becomes, well, it is going to become the primary method here in Idaho, but if other states enact that as well, they're probably going to see less botched attempts than the ones with the firing squad.
So you've described to us your experience watching a man die by lethal injection and how that has impacted you over the last 20 years. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on, and I'm talking purely from this reporter witness perspective. We'll talk about families in a minute. I think they're two separate things. But from a reporter who will witness this, because that's usually always the case, what do you think that would potentially be like to witness an execution by firing squad? I mean, in your opinion, as you said, I mean, of course, less botched, right? This could be a better way. But I can only begin to imagine really the trauma of witnessing that.
That's an excellent question, Gemma. And when I witnessed McBride being executed by lethal injection, all we were seeing at that time was just a man strapped down on a gurney. We saw the tubes in his veins, but that was it. That's something that you've probably noticed or probably seen of a patient in a hospital who has about ready to go for surgery that has tubes in his or her veins, and you don't think anything of it except for, okay, they're going to go into surgery. That's kind of the same thing with McBride, though. He wasn't going into surgery; he was going to die. But we didn't actually see a type of execution like what's going to happen with firing squad. I know what you're saying, and it's. I don't know that I really want to, if I'm given the chance to witness an execution by firing squad, I don't know that I really want to see that, because you're right, because you can probably compare it to someone who's just being shot execution style by a gang. It's going to be tough. I don't know that I'd really want to see that. If that answers your question.
It does. And, you've also written about how all of this impacts families and those who are affected by the crimes that are committed. And I think this is an important part of the conversation, because you and I, in our experiences, have been strictly from a journalistic standpoint, zero connection to the person being executed, zero connection to the victims' families and their friends, right? So I think we have a very narrow lens of the situation. Still highly impactful, still highly traumatic.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about your writings in regards to families and what this does to them to bear witness to this. in particular, I think families of the victims whose loved ones were taken by the hands of this individual.
Mm-hmm. I can't speak for the families. I can't speak for anyone who has been associated with inmates who have been put to death. I'm just coming, like you said, I'm seeing it from my perspective, my observation as a journalist. I don't know, to be honest with you, how I would feel if someone that was close to me, a son, a daughter, a sister, a brother, a mom, a dad, anybody who will have been executed. I don't know how that would affect me. It would affect me certainly greater than what I witnessed as a journalist. The thing with the families of the victims, maybe even more so, because these people who are executed have taken the lives of these families, these parents, child or spouse or father or mother or something like that. It's hard to fathom. I would have to ask them, what's going on through your mind. And I didn't have a chance to talk to McBride's dad or his female companion. I didn't even meet them because they were in a separate part of the building. I don't know, had I asked them, what's going on in your mind, what they would have told me. I have no idea. But I could see from my vantage point, I don't recall, and it's been 20 years ago, but I don't recall seeing the dad's tears. I don't know if I saw the woman's tears or not. I don't recall if they were crying or not, but still, they knew this guy. The father, he was his son. And the woman, she had spent time with Michael Lee as far as a companion is concerned. She had developed a loving relationship with him. So again, I did not get to speak to them. I would have liked to have, but at that moment, after I witnessed it, I thought, I don't know that I want to talk to them because I don't know that they want to talk to me because I'm just a reporter. And I don't know that they would have wanted to have talked to me or not. So I don't know if that's kind of a long answer to your question, Gemma, but I don't know if that's exactly what you were looking for. But it's hard to come across with talking about the emotions or the experience of those who are close to the inmates than just someone who is observing it for a news article.
Before I let you go, as someone who has witnessed an execution, what do you want people to understand, in particular, when it comes to this new law taking effect, and frankly the debate around that, if that makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Typically, if a person has been convicted and sentenced by a jury of his or her peers, usually murder is the case when it comes to capital punishment. I think that, now again, this is my opinion, and you can get another side who's going to argue with me, but lots of times people who are convicted of murder in particular will either be sentenced to life in prison or will be sentenced to death. I think when you are in a state that executes someone probably every 2 weeks, like in Texas, like we've seen, approximately 600 executions have been carried out in Texas in the last 43 years. A lot of executions there, and it was basically had a reputation that Texas executes an inmate every 2 weeks, 10 days to 2 weeks. Sometimes they would have 2 executions a night. So I'm glad that there is an alternative to life in prison for people who commit heinous crimes like this, and some of them have no remorse whatsoever of what they did. And seeing this, I think I'm glad that there's another method, another way of seeing someone have his sentence carried out rather than just sitting on death row for 30 years. The person has been sentenced to death, and instead of him or her sitting in a chamber for 30 or 40 years when the sentence happened 30 or 40 years ago, and they're still trying to exhaust all their appeals. And once those appeals are exhausted, go ahead and carry out the sentence. That's my opinion, and that's what I say, is that there is an alternative, and when a jury of someone's peers recommends to a judge that we believe that this person should be sentenced to death, and the judge carries out or agrees with that sentence recommendation, then instead of waiting 30 or 40 years for this person to die, because the person's going to die in prison regardless, and just carry out the sentence, instead of having this person wait in a jail cell for the rest of his life, knowing that he's not going anywhere but where he is.
I want to thank you so very much for your perspective and
You're
your
most
time
welcome.
today. We've been speaking with Dr. Jeff Spurlock. He's a professor at Boise State University and the Associate Chair of Integrated Media, talking about his recent article on the execution of Michael Lee McBride, as well as the death penalty here in Idaho. This is the Idaho Matters podcast. I'm Gemma Gaudette.